Summer has officially begun, and many groups within the church will be taking a hiatus for July and August, including the Good News team. Mark introduced the idea of the church observing a sabbatical rest. Now, this is not about taking a break from God, but allowing time to rest from the usual busyness of church life, to recharge and renew. It is also an invitation to open up space to experience God's presence in deeper ways, an opportunity to listen to where God is calling you to serve. The Old Testament reading for today is 1Samuel chapter 3. Now, the book of Samuel begins with the touching story of a woman who desperately wanted a child, and each year she would accompany her husband on the 20-mile pilgrimage to the house of the Lord in Shiloh to worship and offer sacrifices. She constantly had to endure the cruel taunting of her husband's other wife. Well, this year, as she knelt in the temple, she could no longer hold back the tears of grief, and she prayed that if God would answer her prayer, she would give the boy back to the Lord. And God heard her plea, and she gave birth to a son, Samuel. And she loved him, but she also loved God. And so when the boy was weaned, maybe about 3 or 4 years old, she took him to the temple and gave him to Eli the high priest to raise in the service to God. And each year as Hannah prepared to make the trek to the temple, she would carefully make Samuel a new robe. And I can imagine her trying to guess just how much she had grown in the past year. And would this robe be big enough? Each stitch sewn with a prayer. When Samuel was around 12 years old, he was awakened one night by a voice calling his name. Samuel, Samuel. Well, thinking that it was Eli, he runs in and says, "Here I am. You called for me?" No, go back to bed." Well, finally, after the third time this happened, Eli realizes that it's God calling out to the boy, and he tells Samuel, the next time this happens, answer, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Now, Eli had 2 sons who would be in line for the priesthood, but they were scoundrels and had no regard for the Lord. Their sinfulness was a symptom of the state of Israel at the time. They had forgotten how God had rescued them from slavery, cared for them in the wilderness, and then led them into their land promised through the covenant with Abraham. They too had turned away from God. The message that God gives Samuel isn't good news for Eli, because it is about the corruption within his own family. Samuel would continue to be used as God's voice, calling the Israelites back to him. It began with a mother's love and fervent prayer. So as we prepare to begin our time of Sabbath rest at St. George's, I encourage you to listen in the stillness for God's voice, and then be willing to respond. Speak, Lord, I am listening. Many have shared how you experience God in nature, and we live in such a beautiful part of God's world. Well, there's a path from the Arboretum leading into Harrison Park, where I find a thin place. The path is carpeted with pine needles. There's a hollow where I pause in the stillness and silence and offer a prayer. So as you're out walking, biking, or canoeing, see if you can discover a thin place and take a moment to bask in God's presence. And I know many will miss the opportunity for connection through coffee hour. But the summer offers opportunities to invite a friend or a yet-to-be friend to grab a cup of coffee and visit by the harbor, or pack a picnic lunch and share at one of our beautiful parks. Please pray with me. To the one who never sleeps, hear our prayer. Whether with a clap of thunder or in a still small voice, give us ears to hear and hearts ready to respond to your call. And when we feel alone, may we find comfort in your loving presence. Encourage us to pray for one another and give us compassionate hearts. May we always be generous with acts of kindness. Amen. Well, I hope you have a really great summer. God bless you, and we'll see you in September.